Silence is often mistaken for weakness, but in reality, it can be the loudest sign that a person has changed forever, a signal that something fundamental has shifted within them. The biggest transformation an empath experiences is not becoming more loving, more patient, or even more understanding, though those qualities may deepen in unexpected ways. It is reaching a point where kindness is no longer given without limits, where compassion is no longer an endless resource that can be drawn upon without consequence. Most people believe an empath's greatest gift is the ability to forgive endlessly, to keep giving chances no matter how many times they have been let down, to always explain their feelings in the hope of being understood, and to carry the emotional weight of everyone around them without complaint. That belief sounds beautiful, almost noble, a vision of selflessness that inspires admiration. But it hides a painful truth that is rarely acknowledged, a truth that can only be learned through experience. Endless compassion without healthy boundaries slowly turns into emotional exhaustion, a depletion that creeps in so gradually that the empath often does not notice it until they are running on empty. The person who once answered every message immediately, who stayed through every disappointment with unwavering hope, and who kept trying to fix every broken relationship eventually begins to disappear, replaced by someone who looks familiar but feels completely different. Not because the heart becomes empty, not because the capacity for love has been exhausted, but because the heart finally becomes wise, because experience has taught lessons that hope alone could never provide. One day, the long conversations stop, the endless dialogues that once seemed so essential. The need to defend every decision fades away, the compulsion to justify every choice dissolving into silence. The urge to convince people of good intentions quietly dies, the desperate need for understanding finally releasing its grip. The emotional reactions that once seemed impossible to control become calm, measured, and almost unreadable, a stillness that is both unsettling and powerful. To those who benefited from unlimited access to an empath's energy, who grew accustomed to the constant flow of care and attention, this new version looks cold, a betrayal of everything they once knew. It looks distant, a withdrawal that feels like abandonment. It even looks heartless, as if the empath has lost the very quality that defined them. But appearances can be deeply misleading, can obscure the truth that lies beneath the surface. Beneath that calm surface is not a person who stopped caring, who has become indifferent to the suffering of others. It is someone who finally learned the painful difference between love and self-sacrifice, who recognizes that loving someone does not require losing yourself in the process. That difference changes every relationship, every conversation, and every decision that follows, reshaping the empath's entire existence. The most surprising part is that psychology reveals this transformation is often a sign of healing rather than emotional damage, a marker of recovery rather than breakdown. What many people call emotional shutdown can actually be the nervous system recovering after years of carrying burdens that never truly belonged to it, a restoration of balance after chronic overload. In this video, we will uncover why empaths reach this hidden turning point, what slowly pushes them toward becoming cold, calm, and unreachable, qualities that are often misunderstood by those who have never walked this path. We will explore why so many people completely misunderstand this change, interpreting it as a loss rather than a gain, and why this final upgrade is less about losing compassion and more about gaining emotional freedom, a liberation that transforms everything. Along the way, you will discover the psychological patterns behind emotional burnout, the silent mistakes that keep many empaths trapped for years, and the unexpected reason why true strength often looks like emotional distance, why the strongest people are often the quietest. Stay with us until the very end, because the final lesson reveals why the strongest empaths are not the ones who give the most, but the ones who finally learn where their kindness should end and their peace should begin, a lesson that changes everything. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy thoughtful explorations of psychology, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns that shape human behavior, make sure to subscribe and join us for more journeys into the deeper side of the mind. The version of the empath that almost everyone recognizes is the one who always seems available, who is always there when needed, who never seems to run out of patience or understanding. This person notices small changes in someone's voice before anyone else does, attuned to the subtlest shifts in tone. A short reply, tired eyes, forced laughter, or a smile that feels slightly different rarely goes unnoticed, each detail registering in the empath's awareness. While many people move through conversations focused on their own thoughts, The empath quietly collects emotional signals without even trying, gathering data that others overlook. This is not always a choice, not always a conscious decision to be hypervigilant. For many, it becomes an automatic habit that develops over years of paying close attention to the feelings of others, a pattern that becomes as natural as breathing. Some grow up in environments where reading emotions becomes necessary to avoid conflict or keep peace, where survival depends on anticipating the moods of others. Others simply possess a natural sensitivity that allows them to understand emotional experiences with unusual depth, a gift that is both a blessing and a burden. Whatever the reason, they begin treating emotions almost like another language, one that constantly speaks beneath words, a subtext that carries more meaning than the surface conversation. Because of this, they often know when someone is hurting long before that person admits it, their perception cutting through the facade. They notice tension hidden behind confidence and loneliness hidden behind success, the hidden struggles that others conceal. While this ability can create deep and meaningful connections, it also creates an invisible burden that few people recognize, a weight that grows heavier with each passing year. The problem begins when emotional intelligence slowly transforms into emotional responsibility, when understanding becomes obligation. These are not the same thing, even though many people confuse them, mistaking one for the other. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize emotions, understand them, and respond wisely, a skill that enhances relationships. Emotional responsibility is the belief that another person's emotional state has somehow become your job to fix, a burden that should never have been placed on your shoulders. This small difference changes everything, reshaping the empath's entire relationship with others. An empath may notice someone feeling anxious and immediately believe they should make that anxiety disappear, as if their own peace depends on it. They notice sadness and begin searching for ways to remove it, unable to tolerate the discomfort of another's pain. They notice anger and immediately wonder what they can do to calm the situation, taking responsibility for emotions that are not theirs. Over time, they stop simply understanding emotions and begin carrying them, absorbing the feelings of others until they can no longer distinguish what belongs to them and what belongs to someone else. Every difficult conversation feels like a problem they must solve, a challenge that demands their attention. Every unhappy person becomes a responsibility they quietly accept, a weight they add to their already burdened shoulders. Instead of asking whether help is wanted, they ask how much of themselves they must sacrifice to make another person feel better, measuring their worth by their usefulness. Without realizing it, compassion slowly turns into obligation, a duty, rather than a choice. This is why so many empaths become emotional caretakers, their identity defined by their ability to support others. They become the friend everyone calls during a crisis, the one who always answers. They become the family member who listens for hours without complaining, the one who never runs out of patience. They become the partner who keeps giving second, third, and even 10th chances because they understand the reasons behind someone's behavior, because they see the pain that drives the actions. Understanding becomes both a gift and a trap, a source of connection and a source of suffering. The more they understand, the harder it becomes to walk away, because leaving feels like abandoning someone who is struggling. They convince themselves that hurt people simply need more patience, that time will eventually heal the wounds. They explain another person's actions instead of paying attention to how those actions affect them, prioritizing understanding over self-protection. They see childhood wounds, hidden fears, insecurity, loneliness, and emotional pain behind every mistake someone makes, always searching for the explanation that will make sense of the behavior. While this perspective is compassionate, it also becomes dangerous when it repeatedly excuses harmful behavior, when understanding becomes a justification for tolerating the intolerable. Instead of asking whether the relationship feels healthy, they become focused on why the other person acts that way, losing sight of their own needs. Their attention shifts away from protecting themselves and toward protecting everyone else, a reversal that leaves them vulnerable. This explains another habit that many empaths struggle to break, a pattern that is both exhausting and self-defeating. They constantly explain themselves, believing that if they can just find the right words, everything will be understood. They explained why they reacted, offering justifications for their feelings. They explained why they felt hurt, hoping that clarity would lead to change. They explained their intentions again and again because they hope that enough understanding will solve every conflict, that persistence will finally break through. Silence feels uncomfortable because silence leaves room for misunderstanding, and misunderstanding feels like a failure. They believe if they simply choose better words, give more context, or show more patience, everything will finally make sense, that the other person will finally see the truth. Yet, the truth is that not every misunderstanding exists because of poor communication. Not every conflict is a result of unclear expression. Some people simply refuse to understand, choosing to remain in their own version of reality. Others only listen enough to defend themselves, hearing only what supports their position. Some hear every explanation, yet continue repeating the same behavior, understanding the words but refusing to change. Still, the empath keeps talking because explaining feels safer than accepting that not every relationship can be repaired through honesty alone, that some connections are beyond saving. Another pattern quietly develops alongside this need to explain, a pattern of endurance that is both admirable and destructive. Empaths stay long after many other people would leave, long after the signs of dysfunction have become obvious. They stay after repeated apologies that lead to no change, after promises that are never kept. They stay because they remember the good moments, the times when the relationship felt right. They stay because they believe everyone deserves another chance, that growth is always possible. They stay because walking away feels like abandoning someone who still has potential to grow, because leaving feels like giving up. They remind themselves that healing takes time, that patience is a virtue. They believe patience will eventually be rewarded, that their endurance will be recognized. Unfortunately, time alone does not create change, does not transform someone who is unwilling to transform themselves. Growth requires willingness, accountability, and consistent effort, qualities that cannot be supplied by the empath alone. Without those qualities, years can pass while nothing truly improves, while the same patterns repeat endlessly. The empath often waits for the version of someone that exists only in hope rather than reality, a ghost that will never materialize. Every promise creates another reason to stay, another thread of hope to cling to. Every small improvement becomes proof that things might finally get better, that change is just around the corner. Meanwhile, their own emotional needs slowly disappear into the background, ignored and unacknowledged. This is how empathy gradually becomes self-neglect, a transformation that is both gradual and devastating. It rarely happens through one dramatic decision, through a single moment of clarity. It happens through countless small choices, each one seeming insignificant on its own. Choosing another person's comfort over your own, sacrificing your peace for theirs. Ignoring your own exhaustion because someone else needs support, setting aside your needs for their benefit. Accepting disrespect because you understand where it comes from, rationalizing behavior that should not be tolerated. Forgiving too quickly because anger feels uncomfortable, avoiding the discomfort of confrontation. Avoiding boundaries because disappointing people creates guilt, choosing their approval over your well-being. These moments seem harmless on their own, small compromises that feel necessary. But together, they slowly reshape an entire identity, eroding the sense of self. The empath becomes known as the reliable one, the patient one, the understanding one, a label that defines them. People begin expecting endless emotional availability, assuming that the empath will always be there. Some appreciate it, valuing the support they receive. Others simply become accustomed to it, taking the empath's generosity for granted. Eventually, giving stops feeling like generosity and starts feeling like obligation, a duty rather than a gift. The empath no longer asks whether they want to help, whether they have the capacity to give. They believe they are supposed to help, that it is their role in every relationship. The hidden cost of living this way does not appear overnight, does not announce itself with obvious signs. Emotional burnout grows quietly, like a plant that has been deprived of sunlight. Unlike physical exhaustion, which often demands immediate rest, emotional exhaustion hides beneath daily routines, concealed by the empath's ability to function. The empath continues smiling, listening, encouraging, forgiving, and supporting while slowly becoming emptier inside, their inner resources depleted. Every disappointment leaves a mark, even when they pretend it does not, even when they convince themselves they are fine. Every broken promise takes away a little more hope, a little more trust. Every one-sided conversation teaches the nervous system that giving rarely leads to receiving. That effort is rarely reciprocated. Emotional overinvestment means pouring enormous amounts of energy into relationships without noticing how little is coming back, without recognizing the imbalance. Because empaths naturally focus on others, they often overlook this imbalance until it becomes impossible to ignore, until the evidence is overwhelming. Compassion fatigue slowly follows, a condition that is both common and rarely recognized. Many people associate this term with doctors, therapists, nurses, or caregivers, those in helping professions. But it can affect anyone who spends years carrying emotional burdens without enough recovery, who gives without receiving. Listening constantly, solving conflicts, calming arguments, comforting pain, and absorbing negativity all require psychological energy, depleting the empath's reserves. That energy is not unlimited, is not an infinite resource. Without rest, appreciation, or healthy boundaries, even the most compassionate person begins feeling emotionally numb, disconnected from their own feelings. It is not because kindness disappears, not because the empath has become a different person. It is because the mind and body begin protecting themselves from endless emotional overload, shutting down to survive. Boundary erosion makes this process even worse, accelerating the descent into burnout. Healthy boundaries are not walls that keep people out, not barriers that prevent connection. They are limits that protect emotional well-being, guidelines that preserve the empath's capacity to care. Yet, many empaths fear boundaries because boundaries can disappoint people, can create conflict. Saying no feels uncomfortable, a violation of their nature. Asking for space feels selfish, a rejection of others. Declining another request creates guilt, a sense of failure. As a result, boundaries slowly disappear until other people's needs occupy nearly every emotional space, leaving no room for the empath's own needs. Friends expect immediate replies, assuming the empath is always available. Family expects unlimited patience, believing the empath will never reach their limit. Partners expect forgiveness without lasting change, assuming that apologies will always be accepted. The empath adapts again and again until personal limits become almost invisible, until they can no longer recognize where they end and others begin. Repeated disappointment eventually changes how the heart responds, hardening it against further hurt. The most painful part is that these disappointments are often small enough to ignore individually, each one seeming trivial on its own. Forgotten promises that sting but are quickly dismissed. Unreturned support that hurts but is rationalized away. Lack of appreciation that wounds but is excused. Emotional inconsistency that confuses but is overlooked. Being understood only when convenient. Having your needs acknowledged only when it suits the other person. Feeling valued only when giving, your worth measured by what you provide. Each experience seems manageable on its own, a small cut that will heal. Yet, together, they become a mountain of silent hurt, an accumulation that cannot be ignored. The breaking point rarely arrives because of one betrayal, one dramatic event that shatters everything. More often, it arrives after hundreds of ordinary moments where the empath quietly realizes they are carrying relationships almost entirely alone, where they recognize the imbalance that has always been there. One-sided relationships slowly become impossible to ignore, their imbalance becoming undeniable. The empath notices they are always initiating conversations, always reaching out. They are always checking on others, always making sure everyone is okay. They are always solving problems, always fixing what is broken. They are always apologizing first, always taking responsibility for conflicts. Or they are always repairing conflicts, always smoothing over the rough edges. They wonder what would happen if they simply stopped trying for a while, if they stopped being the one who holds everything together. Sometimes the answer is painful, a revelation that cuts deep. Nothing happens, because the relationship depended entirely on their effort. The silence reveals that the relationship depended almost entirely on their effort, that without their constant work, the connection would not exist. This realization hurts because it challenges years of emotional investment, because it calls into question the very foundation of the relationship. It forces them to question whether they were truly loved or simply appreciated for what they provided, whether the affection was for them or for their services. Perhaps the heaviest burden of all is feeling emotionally responsible for everyone's healing, believing that it is their job to fix everyone else. The empath believes enough love can save people who refuse to save themselves, that their compassion can overcome any obstacle. They mistake support for rescue, believing that helping someone means taking over their problems. They confuse loyalty with endless sacrifice, believing that love requires self-destruction. But healing cannot be completed by another person, no matter how deeply they care, no matter how much they give. Every individual must eventually face their own fears, habits, and choices, must do the work themselves. Carrying someone else's healing only delays the moment this truth becomes clear, postponing the inevitable. As this realization slowly settles in, the nervous system begins responding differently, adapting to the new understanding. Messages that once demanded immediate attention no longer create panic, their urgency fading. Conflict no longer triggers endless explanations, the need to defend oneself diminishing. Emotional chaos no longer feels like an invitation to fix everything, a call to action. The mind starts conserving energy where it once spent it freely, protecting its resources. This change often surprises both the empath and everyone around them, catching them off guard. It does not happen because love disappears, because the empath has stopped caring. It happens because survival quietly begins taking priority over endless sacrifice, because the empath finally recognizes that they cannot pour from an empty cup. And without announcing itself, the old identity starts fading, making room for a version of the empath that even they have never met before. The most powerful change in an empath is not becoming harder, not developing a thicker skin. It is becoming calmer, a stillness that is both peaceful and powerful. At first, this change can look almost invisible because it happens inside before anyone notices it on the outside, a transformation that is internal before it becomes external. The empath still feels emotions deeply, their sensitivity undiminished. They still notice pain in other people, their empathy intact. They still recognize sadness hidden behind a smile and fear hidden behind confidence, their perception unchanged. The difference is that these emotions no longer take complete control of their actions, no longer dictate their responses. There was a time when every emotional situation demanded an immediate reaction, a response that could not wait. A harsh message created anxiety, a knot in the stomach. Someone pulling away created panic, a desperate need to reconnect. An argument created an overwhelming need to fix everything before the day ended, to restore peace at any cost. Silence felt dangerous, a threat to the relationship. Conflict felt urgent, a crisis that had to be resolved. Every uncomfortable feeling pushed the empath to do something as quickly as possible, to take action before thinking. But emotional healing slowly teaches a completely different lesson, a lesson that transforms everything. Not every emotion deserves immediate action. Not every feeling needs to be acted upon. Not every uncomfortable moment needs to be solved today. Not every conflict requires immediate resolution. Sometimes the healthiest response is allowing emotions to settle before making a decision, giving yourself time to think clearly. This is where emotional regulation begins, the ability to manage one's own emotional state. It is not about ignoring emotions or pretending they do not exist, about suppressing what you feel. It is about refusing to let emotions become the only voice making decisions, about maintaining perspective. Many people think reaction and response mean the same thing, using the words interchangeably. But psychologically, they are very different, representing two completely different processes. A reaction is automatic, happening before awareness has time to enter the situation. Someone criticizes you and you immediately defend yourself, without thinking. Someone ignores you and you instantly assume you have done something wrong, without evidence. Someone becomes angry and your nervous system prepares for conflict before your mind has even understood what is happening, responding to the perceived threat. A response is different because it creates space between the event and the decision, because it introduces a pause. That small space changes everything, transforming the outcome. Instead of speaking from fear, the empath begins speaking from clarity, choosing their words carefully. Instead of chasing reassurance, they become curious, seeking to understand rather than react. Instead of assuming responsibility for another person's emotions, they pause and ask whether those emotions truly belong to them, whether they are theirs to carry. This simple pause often prevents countless unnecessary conflicts because calm thinking replaces emotional urgency, because wisdom guides the response. This change is deeply connected to the nervous system, to the body's stress response. For years, many empaths unknowingly live with a nervous system that remains on constant alert, always scanning for threats. Their body learns to scan every room for emotional tension, to anticipate conflict before it happens. It notices changes in tone, facial expressions, and body language almost instantly, responding before conscious awareness. This sensitivity once helped them protect relationships, gave them the ability to anticipate problems. but over time it also exhausted them, wearing down their reserves. Living in a constant state of emotional awareness leaves very little room for rest, very little space for peace. Every disagreement feels larger than it really is, magnified by the nervous system's vigilance. Every disappointment feels personal, a reflection of their worth. Every misunderstanding feels like a threat to connection, a danger to be avoided. Gradually, healing allows the nervous system to recognize a truth it never fully accepted before, a truth that brings relief. Not every emotional situation is dangerous. Not every conflict is a threat. Not every person's mood is your responsibility. Not every emotion requires your intervention. Not every relationship depends entirely on your effort. Not every connection is yours to sustain. As this understanding grows stronger, the body itself begins relaxing, releasing years of accumulated tension. The heart no longer races every time someone seems distant, the fear of abandonment fading. The mind no longer creates endless stories to explain another person's behavior, the need for understanding diminishing. Calm becomes the natural state instead of a temporary reward after solving everyone else's problems, a baseline rather than a goal. This is where emotional maturity quietly replaces emotional urgency, transforming the empath's experience. Emotional maturity is often misunderstood, reduced to a simple absence of emotion. Many believe it means never feeling hurt or never becoming emotional, a state of perpetual calm. In reality, it means feeling everything without allowing those feelings to control every decision, experiencing emotions without being ruled by them. The empath still experiences disappointment, sadness, frustration, and grief, their emotional range unchanged. Those emotions do not disappear, do not vanish. What changes is their relationship with those emotions, the way they respond to them. Instead of reacting from pain, they begin observing it, watching it without being consumed. Instead of making permanent decisions during temporary emotional storms, they allow themselves time to think, to let the emotion pass before acting. This creates stability that surprises everyone around them, a groundedness that is both reassuring and disorienting. The same person who once needed every conflict resolved immediately now becomes comfortable with uncertainty, trusting that things will work out. They no longer rush to repair relationships that only one person is trying to save, recognizing when their effort is not matched. One of the biggest reasons this transformation feels so dramatic is because the empath slowly stops depending on external validation, on the approval of others. Before healing, much of their self-worth comes from being needed, appreciated, understood, or praised from the recognition of others. Helping others becomes proof that they are valuable, evidence of their worth. Solving problems becomes proof that they matter, demonstration of their importance. Keeping everyone happy becomes proof that they are a good person, validation of their character. But this creates a dangerous cycle, because self-worth now depends on other people's reactions, on their approval. If someone becomes disappointed, the empath feels like a failure, their self-worth crumbling. If someone becomes angry, they question their own character, wondering what they did wrong. If someone withdraws emotionally, they immediately search for mistakes they may have made, blaming themselves. Healing breaks this cycle by building something stronger than approval, something that cannot be taken away. Internal validation slowly replaces external approval, a shift that transforms everything. The empath begins trusting their own values, even when nobody else agrees, confident in their own judgment. They no longer require constant reassurance that they are enough, because their sense of worth no longer depends entirely on someone else's opinion, on external validation. Perhaps one of the hardest lessons during this transformation is learning to let people misunderstand you, to accept that not everyone will see the truth. Earlier in life, misunderstanding felt unbearable, a wound that demanded immediate attention. The empath believed every false assumption had to be corrected, every inaccurate perception addressed. Every accusation required a detailed explanation, every criticism a careful defense. Every conflict demanded another conversation, another attempt to set the record straight. They spent enormous amounts of energy trying to control how others perceived them, to manage their reputation. Eventually, they discover a difficult truth, a lesson that is painful but liberating. Some people have already decided who you are before you speak, their minds made up. Others only hear the parts of your explanation that support what they already believe, filtering out anything that contradicts their assumptions. No amount of honesty can change someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, who has already made up their mind. Accepting this reality brings unexpected freedom, a release from the constant burden of self-defense. The empath stops fighting every false story, conserving their energy for what matters. They stop chasing every lost connection, accepting that some relationships are not meant to last. They stop explaining themselves to people who never intended to understand, recognizing when their words are wasted. Silence becomes stronger than endless defense, a choice rather than a failure. Choosing peace instead of proving yourself becomes one of the greatest signs of emotional growth, a marker of true maturity. Earlier, winning an argument felt important because it seemed connected to love and acceptance, because being right felt like being valued. Now, peace becomes more valuable than being right, because peace cannot be taken away. The empath begins asking different questions, questions that reflect their new priorities. Instead of asking how to convince someone, they ask whether convincing them is even necessary, whether the effort is worth it. Instead of asking how to keep everyone comfortable, they ask what protects their own emotional well-being, what sustains them. This shift often confuses people because the empath no longer participates in unnecessary emotional battles, no longer rises to every provocation. Arguments lose their attraction, their power to draw the empath in. Drama loses its influence, its ability to control the empath's emotions. Emotional chaos no longer receives unlimited attention, its demand for energy denied. This calm presence can appear cold to people who expect emotional reactions because they mistake quiet confidence for emotional distance, because they cannot understand the stillness. Real strength rarely announces itself loudly, rarely demands attention. It often appears as emotional quietness, a stillness that is both powerful and unshakable. The strongest person in a difficult conversation is not always the one speaking the most, the one dominating the exchange. Sometimes it is the one who remains grounded without becoming defensive, who stays centered while others lose control. Sometimes strength looks like refusing to continue an unhealthy argument, choosing to walk away rather than engage. Sometimes it looks like leaving a relationship that no longer respects your boundaries, choosing yourself over the connection. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explaining for an hour afterward, trusting your decision without justification. Calm is powerful because it cannot be easily controlled by fear, because it is not reactive. When someone no longer reacts predictably, emotional manipulation begins losing its power, its effectiveness diminishing. This naturally leads to another change that many people misunderstand, a shift that is often misinterpreted. The empath becomes unreachable. Their emotional doors no longer open to everyone. This does not mean they stop loving people or lose the ability to connect. Does not mean they have become cold and distant. It simply means access is no longer unlimited, that the empath is now selective about who they let in. Earlier, almost anyone could reach the empath emotionally, could gain access to their heart. A sad story immediately opened their heart, their compassion activated. An apology erased months of hurt, their forgiveness quick. A promise of change restored hope, their trust easily given. Their emotional doors remained open almost all the time, available to anyone who knocked. Now, those doors still exist, but they are protected, guarded by wisdom. People must earn trust instead of expecting it automatically, must demonstrate their worthiness. Being unreachable is actually becoming emotionally selective, choosing who to let in. The empath still forms deep relationships, still craves connection, but they no longer offer complete vulnerability at the beginning, no longer trust without evidence. They understand that trust is built through consistency, not words, through actions over time. They pay attention to actions over promises, valuing behavior more than talk. They observe patterns instead of isolated moments, looking at the big picture. Someone may speak beautifully about loyalty, kindness, or love, their words convincing. But the empath now waits to see whether those words become reality, whether they are backed by action. This patience protects them from repeating painful cycles that once seemed impossible to escape, cycles that drained their energy. Healthy boundaries become a natural part of daily life instead of a guilty exception, integrated into their existence. The empath learns that boundaries are not punishments, not rejections. They are expressions of self-respect, declarations of worth. Saying no is no longer viewed as hurting someone, but as protecting themselves. Taking time alone is no longer considered selfish, but necessary. Declining emotional responsibility for another person's choices no longer creates overwhelming guilt, but a sense of freedom. These boundaries protect energy that was once given away without thought, energy that is now valued. Emotional energy becomes valuable because the empath finally understands it is limited, that it can be depleted. Every unnecessary conflict, every one-sided relationship, and every emotionally draining conversation carries a cost, a price that must be paid. Instead of spending that energy everywhere, they begin investing it where it is appreciated and returned, where it is valued. Protecting emotional energy also changes vulnerability, the willingness to be open. Earlier, openness happened almost immediately because honesty felt like the quickest path to connection, because it created intimacy. Now, vulnerability becomes selective, offered only to those who have earned it. The empath understands that sharing personal pain is a privilege, not an obligation, something that must be earned. Not everyone deserves access to their deepest fears, dreams, or wounds. Not everyone has earned that trust. Trust must be earned slowly through respect, consistency, honesty, and emotional safety, through demonstrated reliability. This selective vulnerability creates relationships that feel healthier because intimacy is built on mutual care instead of emotional urgency, because it is balanced. As peace becomes more valuable than approval, many old relationships begin changing, shifting in ways that reveal their true nature. People who once enjoyed unlimited emotional access suddenly experience healthy distance, a new boundary they did not anticipate. Some accept this change with respect, honoring the empath's growth. Others become confused, uncertain of how to navigate the new dynamic. A few become angry because the rules have changed without warning, because they no longer benefit from the old pattern. They remember the version of the empath who always answered immediately, who never kept them waiting. The version who always forgave quickly, who never held a grudge. The version who always listened for hours, who never ran out of patience. The version who always placed everyone else's needs first, who never prioritized themselves. That version no longer exists, has been replaced by someone new. To those who benefited from endless emotional availability, this new distance feels like rejection, a betrayal of the old relationship. They may accuse the empath of changing, becoming selfish, or losing compassion, of abandoning them. They may even attempt to create guilt in hopes of restoring the old dynamic, of regaining their access. But inside the empath, this distance feels completely different, feels like liberation. It does not feel like rejection, like a punishment. It feels like breathing freely after years of carrying invisible weight, like finally being able to exhale. It feels like waking up from a role they never realized they were playing, a role that was never truly theirs. They no longer confuse love with endless sacrifice, with self-destruction. They no longer measure kindness by how much pain they are willing to tolerate, by their capacity to endure. They finally understand that protecting inner peace is not an act of cruelty, not a betrayal of their nature. It is an act of wisdom, a sign of emotional maturity. This is the deepest meaning behind the darkest upgrade, the true significance of the transformation. The empath does not become cold because love disappears, because they have stopped caring. They become impossible to manipulate through guilt, because they recognize the tactic. They become impossible to control through emotional chaos, because they refuse to be drawn in. They become impossible to convince that destroying themselves is the highest form of compassion, because they know their worth. They still care deeply, their heart's still open. They still understand people with remarkable sensitivity, their perception's still sharp. They still forgive when forgiveness is deserved, when change has been demonstrated. But understanding another person's pain no longer means remaining where that pain continues to harm them, staying in a situation that damages them. And kindness is no longer measured by how much of themselves they are willing to lose, by their capacity for self-sacrifice. The journey of an empath is often misunderstood because most people only notice the beginning and the end, the before and after. They remember the person who always listened, always forgave, always stayed, and always carried everyone else's pain without complaint, the version they knew. What they rarely see is everything that happened in between, the long and painful process of transformation. They do not see the quiet disappointments, the small betrayals that accumulated over time. They do not see the sleepless nights, the hours spent lying awake in pain. They do not see the emotional exhaustion, the slow depletion of energy, or the countless moments when kindness was mistaken for weakness, when generosity was exploited. They do not see how years of giving without limits slowly reshape a person's identity until one day change is no longer a choice, until it becomes a necessity for survival. Throughout this journey, we have discovered why empaths absorb emotions more deeply than most people, why they carry burdens that do not belong to them. We have explored why emotional burnout slowly changes the way they see themselves and the world, why they become different people. We have learned why true calm is so often mistaken for coldness, why the empath's stillness is misinterpreted. We have understood why healthy boundaries can make someone appear distant to those who once had unlimited access to their energy, why their withdrawal feels like rejection. Most importantly, we have uncovered that the empath's darkest upgrade is not about losing love, compassion, or kindness, about becoming less. It is about gaining something they may have been missing for years, something they desperately needed. Emotional freedom, the ability to choose themselves without guilt. The greatest transformations almost never arrive with dramatic announcements, with fanfare and celebration. They happen quietly, in the private moments of decision. They appear in the conversations you decide not to continue, the arguments you choose not to engage. They appear in the apology you no longer chase, the closure you create for yourself. They appear in the guilt you refuse to carry for problems that were never yours to solve, the weight you finally put down. They appear in the simple word no, spoken without fear, without explanation. Little by little, those moments create a completely different life, a life that is truly your own. Some people will believe you have become distant, that you have pulled away from them. Others may say you have changed, that you are not the person you used to be. In many ways, they are right, because you have changed. But change is not always a loss, not always a diminishment. Sometimes it is a return to the person you were before guilt, people-pleasing, and endless emotional responsibility convinced you that your worth depended on sacrificing yourself for everyone else. The final lesson every empath eventually learns is both simple and powerful, a truth that changes everything. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your heart. Not everyone has earned that privilege. Your kindness is precious, but it is not meant to be endless at the expense of your own well-being, not a resource to be depleted. Protecting your peace does not make you selfish, does not mean you have stopped caring. It does not make you uncaring, does not mean you have become cold. It does not make you cold, does not mean you have lost your warmth. It makes you whole, complete in yourself. And once an empath truly understands that, life begins to feel lighter, healthier, and more honest than ever before. But this is not the end of the story, not the final chapter. There is an even deeper transformation waiting beyond becoming cold, calm, and unreachable, beyond the protection of boundaries. It is the moment an empath no longer asks for permission to choose themselves, no longer seeks validation for their decisions. It is the moment they no longer fears disappointing others by honoring their own needs, no longer sacrifices themselves for approval. And it is the moment they no longer mistakes self-sacrifice for love, recognizes the difference. That transformation changes not only relationships, but every part of life, reshaping the empath's entire existence. If this video helped you see yourself or someone you love in a new way, take a moment to like this video, because it helps more people discover these ideas and find the validation they need. Share it with someone who needs this message today, who is on their own journey of transformation. And if you enjoy exploring psychology, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns of human behavior, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey. The next video may reveal the one lesson that finally explains why the strongest empaths stop chasing, stop explaining, and quietly become the people they were always meant to be, the people they were always capable of becoming. Until then, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and remember that choosing yourself is sometimes the kindest decision you will ever make, because you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot give what you do not have.